Captain Michael Torres settled into seat 12F, adjusting his olive green jacket as his 8-year-old son David buckled in beside him. The afternoon flight from Denver to Atlanta was packed, filled with the usual mix of business travelers and families heading home after Thanksgiving weekend. Michael ran his hand through his dark hair, still feeling the weight of the decision he had made 6 months ago. Leaving the Air Force after 15 years of service had not been easy, but David needed stability. Since Maria had passed away 2 years earlier, it had been just the two of them. And Michael knew his son needed more than video calls from overseas, deployments. "Dad, look at those jets," David whispered, pressing his face against the small airplane window as they taxied past a formation of military aircraft, visible in the distance. Michael smiled, remembering his own childhood fascination with aircraft. "Those are F-22 Raptors, son. The most advanced fighter jets in the world." A woman across the aisle glanced over with interest. She appeared to be in her late 30s with blonde hair pulled back and wearing a professional navy blazer. She had been working on her laptop since boarding, but now she closed it and leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me," she said politely. I could not help but overhear. "Are you familiar with military aircraft?" Michael nodded modestly. "I have some experience with them, yes." "My name is Sarah Coleman. I am a journalist with Aviation Weekly." She extended her hand across the aisle. "I am actually working on a story about modern air combat pilots. Would you mind if I asked what your connection is to the military?" David looked up at his father with pride. "My dad was a pilot. He flew the really fast planes." Michael placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "David, remember we talked about not bothering other passengers?" "Oh, he is not bothering me at all," Sarah said warmly. "A pilot? That must have been quite an experience. What did you fly?" "F-22s mostly for the last 8 years," Michael replied simply, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered one of the most challenging professions in the world. Sarah's eyes widened. "F-22s? Those pilots are among the elite of the elite. There are only, about 180 pilots qualified to fly them?" "Something like that," Michael confirmed, uncomfortable with the attention but appreciating her knowledge of aviation. The conversation was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been asked by air traffic control to hold our position for a few minutes. There appears to be some military air traffic in the area conducting training exercises." Through the windows, passengers began pointing as 2 sleek F-22 Raptors came into view, flying in perfect formation about 1,000 feet above them. The aircraft moved with the fluid precision that only came from hundreds of hours of training and absolute mastery of their machines. David pressed his nose against the window again. "Dad, they look just like the ones you used to fly." An older gentleman in the seat behind them leaned forward. "Son, did you say your father flew those aircraft?" "Yes, sir," David replied with obvious pride. "He was really good at it too. He has lots of medals and everything." Michael felt heat rise in his cheeks. "David, please. We do not need to discuss this with everyone." But Sarah was looking at him with new interest. "I apologize for prying, but what was your call sign?" "In my research, I have learned that F-22 pilots often have rather distinctive ones." Michael hesitated. His call sign was not something he shared casually. It carried weight in certain circles, recognition that sometimes brought unwanted attention. But there was something genuine about Sarah's curiosity, and David was looking at him expectantly. "Phantom," he said quietly. The reaction was immediate and unexpected. A man several rows ahead, who had been reading a magazine, suddenly turned around. He was wearing a casual button-down shirt, but something about his bearing suggested military background. "Did someone just say phantom?" the man called out. Sarah looked confused. "Is that significant?" The man unbuckled his seatbelt and made his way back toward them, his expression a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Sir, forgive me, but did you say your call sign was Phantom?" Michael nodded reluctantly. "That is correct." Major Tom Bradley, F-16 pilot stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, the man said, extending his hand with obvious respect. Sir, I have heard stories about Phantom, the red flag exercises, the combat missions over Syria. You are a legend in the fighter pilot community. Other passengers were beginning to take notice of the commotion. Michael felt increasingly uncomfortable with the attention, but David was beaming with pride. What is red flag? Sarah asked, her journalistic instincts fully engaged. Major Bradley looked at Michael for permission before answering. Red flag is the most realistic air combat training in the world. Phantom here holds the record for most simulated kills in a single exercise, 17 enemy aircraft in 5 days. No one has come close to matching it. An elderly woman across the aisle spoke up. Young man, are you saying this gentleman is some sort of hero? Michael shifted uncomfortably. I am just someone who did his job, ma'am. No different from any other service member. With all due respect, sir, Major Bradley continued, what you did during Operation Desert Shield was extraordinary. When those Iranian fighters engaged our reconnaissance aircraft, you single-handedly... Major, Michael interrupted gently but firmly. I appreciate your kind words, but I would prefer not to discuss operational details in a public setting. David tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, what is he talking about? What did you do? Michael looked down at his son, seeing the curiosity and pride in the boy's eyes. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes good people have to do difficult things to protect others? Sometimes, son, pilots have to make very quick decisions to keep other people safe. It is part of the job. Sarah had been listening intently. Mr. Torres, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but in my research on modern aviation heroes, your name has come up several times. The pilots I have interviewed speak of you with tremendous respect. Heroes? Michael repeated, shaking his head. I am just a single father trying to raise his son. The real heroes are the ones who did not make it home. The sincerity in his voice seemed to quiet the cabin. Several passengers were now openly listening to the conversation, and Michael could feel the weight of their attention. Major Bradley sat down in an empty seat nearby. Sir, if I may ask, why did you leave the service? Pilots of your caliber usually make it a career. Michael glanced at David, who was listening intently. My son lost his mother 2 years ago. He needed his father home, not deployed overseas. 10 months a year. Some things are more important than flying. The cabin fell silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Sarah closed her laptop completely, no longer thinking about her story but about the man sitting across from her. That must have been an incredibly difficult decision, she said softly. The most difficult of my life, Michael admitted. Flying was not just what I did, it was who I was. But David is my priority now. He has already lost one parent. I was not going to risk him losing another. David reached over and took his father's hand. I am glad you came home, Dad. I missed you when you were gone. Michael squeezed his son's hand, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever David mentioned missing him during deployments. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been cleared for takeoff. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Major Bradley stood up. Sir, it has been an honor meeting you. If you ever decide you want to get back in the cockpit, even as an instructor, I know a lot of people who would jump at the chance to learn from you. Michael nodded politely. Thank you, Major. But my flying days are behind me now. As Bradley returned to his seat, Sarah leaned across the aisle one more time. Mr. Torres, I know you value your privacy, but would you ever consider sharing your story? Not the classified details, but your perspective on service, sacrifice, and what it means to be a hero? I think people need to hear voices like yours. Ikrol considered her question as the plane lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. Through the window he could see the F-22s in the distance, still conducting their training exercises. Maybe someday, he said finally. But right now, my most important mission is sitting right here beside me. David looked up at his father with adoring eyes. Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Michael felt his heart swell with both pride and responsibility. Then, be kind, be honest, and always put family first. The rest will take care of itself. As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, Michael Torres, the man they called Phantom, held his son's hand and watched the clouds drift past the window, knowing that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen not in the sky, but in the quiet moments when we choose love over glory.